Hello, everyone. Welcome to a very special episode of the Archives Book Club. I am joined by two very brilliant individuals, Max Yu of TerranCraft, and of course my co-host Adraseth. Very happy to be here to discuss not one, not two books, but two books and a TerranCraft article, and I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, welcome back, everybody. Good to have another show going, and very excited to have Max Yu here with us, the author of the TerranCraft blog. If you've spent any time around the Reddit StarCraft, you've probably seen some of his posts. That's where I've seen them, and they're really thought out, well-informed posts about StarCraft and how to play the game, how to think about the game, mostly from the Terran perspective as things I've read, but still really awesome content. And today we're going to weave that blog post that just came out a few days ago, I think on Thursday, maybe our time. And we're going to weave that into a couple of books. One we've done before, Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke, but a new book that we haven't talked about, and that is Superforecasting. And I don't have the author written down, so hopefully Eric can pick it up on that. But Max, why don't you introduce yourself so people who haven't seen you on camera before, because I know we talked about this earlier, you're not a streamer, and you haven't done production before, so it's nice to see you on camera.
Good to have me here. Thanks for having me here. I'm Max. So I run the TerranCraft blog. One of the Terran there. So pretty good because I'm head. And for full-time job, I'm a behavioral scientist. And that's why I kind of have those ideas about how we think, how we think about things psychologically, systematically, and so on. The biases that we have.
Yeah, I realized this right before I went live. That I'm here talking about all this science stuff with a couple of PhDs, and I'm a little bit underqualified here to be discussing this stuff. But I'm glad I got a couple of really bright folks on the show with me.
I mean, StarCraft is basically its own science, so we'll give you the honorary PhD.
There you go,
Dr. Eric.
It really attracts a lot of people, scientists, artists. It's just really great.
Yeah.
In general, StarCraft is a brainy game, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very true. A lot of scientists, PhDs in various fields, and software developers, engineers.
Yeah, the dev crew, for my experience, I didn't know the dev crew as well until I started hanging out in Eric's Discord, because that's definitely where all the developers are. And it's amazing how many folks are in that field that really enjoy real-time strategy games in general. And it's pretty cool. So Max, how long have you been playing StarCraft and thinking about StarCraft? Because it seems like quite a while.
I only touched StarCraft in 2010 when Wings of Liberty is out. I didn't touch a beta. I don't know anything about Brood War. I make a point that I will never play Brood War. That's what I can say so.
Okay. That was probably about the time that I played Brood War a little bit, but not competitively or online. But I picked up StarCraft in earnest around 2010. How about you, Eric? You were in Wings of Liberty, right?
Yeah. So I actually got into the beta. It was actually I didn't get in. My girlfriend at the time got in. I used her account. And I played a few times. I did there was a Void Ray cheese that was really popular, like when the beta first opened. I did that like a couple times until I lost. Somebody slapped it down. I said, yeah, all right, this game's too scary, and I kind of just stopped. And then I kind of I played the campaign. I played Heart of the Swarm. Played the campaign there too. And then when I went to ladder, I was still too scared, so I played the Wings ladder after the Hots ladder was already out. And I didn't actually really start. I didn't have the bravery to really start until Legacy came out, and then I really kind of said, okay, I'm gonna train. I'm gonna get better at this game, and I'm gonna not be scared anymore.
Right, and so began your streaming career.
Yes, indeed.
That's where the history was made. So Max, how did you get into?
What's that, Max?
No, I just saying that's really admirable of him. You're really scared of going ladder, and progressively. Oh, now okay, I'm going to do it for everybody. I'm going to show everybody. Everybody can do it. Be positive, learning. That's really admirable.
Thank you.
Now, Max, when did you start writing blog post and getting into like the cerebral aspect of dissecting the game through these kind of informative posts that you've been putting up on TerranCraft? When did you start doing that?
2012. So I just hit diamond, Wings of Liberty. I was like, yeah, okay, I gotta write something about this. That's on my brain. I have so many things I want to talk about and like just organize my thoughts. So I think writing it down helps a lot because as you write, you find evidence, and as you go along, like, hey, I was wrong because I was only picking up several replays I watched. But when you look at the more general sample size, right, or bigger sample size, it's like, hey, that's not true, and you start organizing your thoughts, and that's how I thought like writing is a good way to improve myself, thinking wise. And the other most important thing is just simply to improve my writing. It was horrible.
Well, that's definitely one way to go if you want to get better at writing. Just write a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely. I actually kind of wondered about that because, yeah, it seems like your writing is so like natural, and you're able to take these really complex ideas, and I feel like you always use like exactly enough words to get the idea across without it ever being too much or not enough. And I was wondering if that was hard or if that came naturally to you. So I guess in a way it's kind of cool that you had to like really work towards that.
Yeah, I think it's because in 2012 is my honest year. So as I really become my mind like, okay, I need to do really well. I need to get a scholarship. I can do my PhD, like, have a plan down. It's like writing is my weakest thing. So I would write. Everybody knows, right? You need to write to improve writing. But how do you write something when you don't like it? When you have, you can't make yourself right. Like you just can't do it. Like make some exercise. So I picked StarCraft, something I like to do anyway. And then other benefits like improve my game, so on and so forth. And like you say, right, one of the key thing is to express an idea in abstract ideas to more general audience. I think that's a very important skills for a lot of people, a lot of careers, and specifically for academics, right? That's the
Right.
main outputs of your performance. So that is the idea behind it and how to write it. And I read my articles I read like written like 8 years ago. I was like, oh my god, is it me? 7 years ago now.
Yeah.
Shit, it's like slightly better. And now it's like I kind of look back like some of the articles I wrote like 6 months ago, whereby I didn't do too much proofreading. It's like, okay, it is not natural. I need a lot of proofreading. So yeah, lots of work.
Yeah, makes sense. By way of introductions, I suppose it goes without saying at this point, but I didn't actually shout him out. We do have Lord Cranial on deck here again for moderation. So as we dive into the book here today, or books, I should say, if you have questions or interesting points you want to make, maybe something you caught that we didn't, feel free to shout that out in the chat. He's going to be on top of it, kind of compiling a list of things, and we'll do all the question and answer stuff at the end. So I guess we should go ahead.
I have a very specific question for Max before we dive into the books. Max, so you're in Singapore. I don't know if everybody knows that, but to get the time zones right, we had to choose a very specific time to do the episode. That's we're a little bit later than normal. But in Singapore in 2010, 2012, when you first started playing StarCraft, what server were you playing on? Were you playing on the Korean server or were you playing on the Australian server?
At that point of time, I was in Australia. So I was in Australia for like 10 years.
Okay.
And just came to Singapore. So at the point of time, I was playing in the C server, whereby you have the Singapore and Australia basically playing on the same server. And right now, everybody's in the US server. I mean, not server, but the US one that you hop around. So yeah. And I think right now, I go on Singapore when I play by default. And it's like rolling a dice once you get higher up in the rank. Like you don't have a choice. And I roll Singapore, you lose. I roll US, okay, I lose. That's kind of funny sometimes.
Yeah, the lag to Australia is pretty tough from the United States. It's like 250, 300 millisecond ping for us.
Yeah, I think that can explain why Zerg at that point in time, like Rings of Liberty, Heart of the Swarm, early Heart of the Swarm, are more representative in the top Australian scenes. I mean, not dumping on like Zerg or wherever it is, right? Just like you can, because you kind of swarm more, you don't do mini reactive micro a bit less compared like Terran splitting and stuff like Link
Mhm.
Stalkers. So you can see that the performance at a higher level is more representative of Zerg. But once the Australian service out, right, it starts to become more diverse.
That's really interesting. I hadn't considered that.
Yeah,
So way
nowadays.
back you have Moonglade, you have Pig,
Mhm.
like I think the one that Tasos was casting way back 2012, I think. Like top 8, I think, like, is it 8 Zerg or 7 Zerg? I can't remember that. You know?
Yeah, it was a while ago. I don't remember either. The only Australian that I can think of that's top level, not Zerg, is probably Probe.
Mm.
And we're probably
Yeah.
forgetting some other folks, but
Yeah,
there's
we just made a bunch of people mad right now.
yeah, right. Head to the forums, boys.
Yeah.
But that's interesting. So when that server went away, it changed things, and that's currently a problem now with everything's moved to online. We don't have in-person events right now anymore. So choosing the server is very contentious. I know.
Mm-hmm. A lot of drama around
Right.
that right now.
Mhm.
So should we?
And that's how Maru give excuse, dodge Zero.
Yep. So shall we dive into these topics? I'm really eager to get into some of this stuff.
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. So let's see. I guess the sort of core concept that super forecasting deals with is essentially being able to predict things and looking at people who are better at this skill of prediction than others, so-called super forecasters. It kind of, talks about a lot of concepts which are around that idea, but that's sort of the central thing. And I think what we can use that for in StarCraft is mostly thinking about how to make better predictions and how to critique our predictions. Would you guys say that's probably a fair kind of general summary?
Yeah.
Did I miss things?
Pretty good.
It's pretty good, and
Say
I wanted to add. I want to add to that too that when I read Thinking in Bets versus Super Forecasting, Thinking in Bets sort of makes the case for this style of predictions and thinking and sort of giving yourself a 7 out of 10 on your prediction, whereas Super Forecasting really goes into quantifying those predictions. And I found that was one distinct difference if anybody reads these books and or listens to them on audiobook, that Annie Duke talks about, like, let me make the case for why you should start predicting and why this is games with incomplete information. But it definitely is spot on with what you said, Eric.
Yeah, it's I guess one book gives you more of the why should you care about this, and the other book kind of gives you here's how to do it and be really good at it.
Right.
Nice. You did touch on the incomplete information aspect. Obviously, like, that's crucial to this whole concept, right? If we aren't dealing with an incomplete information game, then we're not really in the business of forecasting. We're certainly not as much, right? I might forecast what is my opponent trying to set up, right? And I can inform that based on all of the known information in the game, but it's I think significantly more important in something like poker or something like StarCraft, where I don't actually have all of the information that I like. In fact, I even need to make decisions about how much should I invest to get information, right? Because I can choose that. I can probe scout right off the bat, should I do that, or can I get away with doing it a little bit more cheaply? That's kind of an interesting thing to touch on as well.
Yeah, I think imperfect information is one of the perhaps the most defining factors for game genre itself, for RTS. I mean, it does not actually say is imperfect information in its name. Like the thing would be like, oh, it's real time. It's a turn based, right? But way back, I can't remember which game it was. It designed for a war. And since then, almost every RTS pick it up. It has become the unspoken key aspect of the drama. And I don't think anyone is going to challenge that assumption and create new RTS without, that aspect of it. Probably throw people off, but maybe there's a new genre created if you do that. So I think that really is a key aspect, and it opened rooms to many research, academic research, right? Look at AlphaStar with DeepMind. So yeah, it's really cool.
Nice.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. That if you think back to the very earliest RTSs, or what we consider something like an RTS, the idea of fog of war has changed a bit in the
Mhm.
way that the games have used it,
Right.
and that actually kind of took the game from being more like a complete information game like chess to an incomplete information game like poker.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what you guys just said earlier on, is that all these books build on the fact that you forecast because of uncertainty, and for StarCraft, a lot of it comes down to imperfect information. Uh, so if you play Go, you play chess, it's perfect information. In a way, like kind of AI, it can always solve the game. Just a matter of can you really improve on it? Like this move actually is better, right?
Mhm.
Right now, AI is like, if an AI got better AI, not so good AI, but theoretically, the game can be solved. That's a perfect move,
Mhm.
right? But in StarCraft, it's still debatable because of
Right.
imperfect information. So I think that is the cool aspect. And from a human player perspective, that's great. Every game is not the same.
Mhm. Yeah, you're forever chasing the the almost invisible skill of, I can make all of these different moves, but what do I think is correct against this human this time, in this game of this series? And you don't really get a lot of sort of retries at that, right? So, even
Mm.
if my opponent's Adverseth and we've played a million times, this day, this series in game 3, what is his, on this map, what is he going to do? And there's so many predictions that can really go into that.
Right. And when you get into that, especially in tournament play, where we see that where opponents will face each other in a best of 5, best of 7, you get into that meta aspect of, okay, do you know this person? Do you know their style? What do they like to do? Where do they like to move their army? How do they react to certain things? And you can see when some players, and I'm speaking obviously of like the GSL, the highest level of play type of players, when some players face an opponent that they know really well, like teammates when they face each other, it's really interesting how they metagame each
Hmm.
other because they have some insider information that maybe we don't as the viewers see through the game of StarCraft. But on the ladder, when your opponent is virtually anonymous and you're just dealing with fog of war and the information you can gather from scouting, it's a completely different mindset that you have to have.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So let's see. Adreseth, you really liked this riddle that the book.
Yeah.
Do you wanna
Yeah,
dive into that?
this one I've heard this before, and I like these little mind twister type of questions. And so this is in Superforecasting, which what we read thinking about a few episodes ago, and that was with our friend Lamb and Rice was on the show. And so I just was reading through Superforecasting just recently, and this little excerpt came up, and I just love this thing. So the question is, a ball and a bat together cost $1.10, and the bat costs $1 more than the ball. So how much does the bat cost, and how much does the ball cost? And when you hear that riddle or you hear that little brain teaser, your immediate reaction is to say, well, the bat costs $1 because you heard the word dollar in the explanation, and the thing costs $1.10. So you say, okay, it costs $1. But in reality, what I just said, or what was asked of you, is the bat costs $1 more than the ball. So the ball has an inherent cost, and you have to add $1 to that. So it ends up being 5 cents for the ball and $1.05 for the bat. So that's the answer. But for most of us, at least the first time we hear that, and obviously I've heard this one before, so when I read it, I thought it was just a great little excerpt. The first time you hear it, you tend to assume that the bat costs $1. And the reason why is that we humans are sort of genetically programmed from evolution to make quick assumptions or quick judgments on very little information. And that's something that keeps us alive. And I like the way that Superforecasting covers this. This is in other books as well, including Thinking in Bets. but I believe it's in some of the other books we've read, that there's this idea that if you have a false positive isn't as bad as a false negative in nature.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're hunter-gatherers out in the plains of Africa somewhere, and we think we see a lion in the grass, it's better to be safe than sorry. Whereas if we're walking around and we ignore some thing that might be a lion in the grass, we end up dead and we don't get to procreate. We don't get to have, our genetic code doesn't go on in the world. So this is kind of an interesting thing that we have inherent in our brains that we can't really turn off. And that riddle kind of is the exemplar of this idea that you see something and you make a quick judgment, because as humans, we like to categorize, we like to make conclusions as fast as we can. And even in my own experience, just outside of StarCraft as a scientist, this is something you have to work very hard against, because it puts bias into your judgments. So when it comes to the game of StarCraft, and I just really like this, it's something we can kind of kick around, this idea is that sometimes having that quick judgment is good, and sometimes having that quick judgment is bad. And StarCraft is this interesting game that if you, for example, see something you think is a cheese and you react to it and it's not, you actually set yourself behind. But if you react to it and it was, you look like a hero because you nailed all the things that you needed to do and you defend against it or whatever. And I'm interested to hear what Max and Eric, what your thoughts were on this idea of the false positives and the way of thinking in these in the RTS.
Max, does anything jump out at you right away?
Yeah. So Sarah comes on mine. Going back to the point that I remember first time I hear it, is I hear from my now father-in-law. So way back he asked me this question. I was like, and I was like, the instinct kicks in, right? Like I say, $1, duh.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't say anything yet, but I was like, something is off. Immediately something's off, but I can't tell. So I do the math in my mind. He looked at me and was like, okay, you're thinking, and all this stuff. Then he revealed to me saying like, X percentage of Harvard graduates can't get it right. So at least you can get it right. I was like, really? That's not right. It's impossible they can't get it right. So I started, searching out and stuff, and I do realize it's kind of true. It's famous not for the question itself. It's famous because of Harvard's. Right, I think it's from Kahneman and Frederick. It's the original research for that. So there are many little questions like this that kind of touch on human instinct, and this is the one that kind of get most celebrated because of the Harvard. People at Harvard get it right. I think the whole point is that even you are very smart, we humans still rely on instinct, right? Like you say, it comes out of biology, evolutions. We have it in us. And sometimes it works really well for us. And sometimes, well, not so well. And we have to kind of correct ourselves, stop it, and okay, maybe that's not the whole story, right? And then we patch it together and do better. And lead on to your next point about StarCraft, right? Or false positive, is it going to cheese and so on. And one thing very interesting that I see for pro gamer is that they look at the available information that they have, and they're like, okay, that is what I'm going to do, right on the spot. I was like, wow. Is it instinct? What's instinct based on your past experience and so on and so forth?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the time is, I don't think that is like, you see like 10 times, 100 times. I don't think so. For example, like the game that, is it TY was stats yesterday, the game one. So TY scouted the proxy stuff on. You can say a lot of many things. Okay, I see you scouted the proxy. I don't want to let you know I scouted the proxy. Then right now, I'm going to, rather than doing the typical Heaven's job that he did against Friday, I'm going to set all the Marines and all this stuff to deny the pylon. Something you can't do if you don't scout early, right? And all this like sequential decision making that TY made, by like, I'm sure he instinctively, okay, don't let you see my SU, and then he think, okay, what can I do now? Instinctively be like, all right, I need to adjust my bit a little bit to defend against Oracle, right? Because it's going to hit their mind and all these things. But it's like, go on, maybe I can kind of deny your pylon and everything's in my favor, right? So I highly doubt he played like 100, 200 times, like because it requires you to understand the distance of the starport itself. I mean, not starport, the stargates, right? So all this you can see top professional players, at the first part, instinctively they're not allowing people to see that you have scouted it. So that's like what we can talk about. But it adds on sequentially about things that you kind of correct and improve along the way and make better decisions.
I'm so glad that you brought up TY as an example.
Yeah.
It might be because he just played in GSL, maybe, but I'd like to think that even if he hadn't, I would have immediately thought of him specifically out of any pro gamer in all of StarCraft, specifically talking about this skill set. I think that he and Artosis and Tasteless kind of call this out from time to time when speaking about him. His superpower is that in the moment ability to process what he's seeing in the game and say, okay, I've maybe never been in this exact situation before, and I'm going to come up with like the most brilliant, beautiful way to punish what my opponent is doing, and I'm going to be like completely decisive in doing that as well. Not just, oh, maybe I'll do this. It's like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to commit to it, and most of the time it's going to work. And I love that about him. I wish that I had that skill.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you bring up about TY. I mean, TY is an amazing player in general, but the decisiveness is one of his characteristics as a pro player that you see, where he makes a decision and goes with it. And I've noticed this, just in friends and looking at replays of people around my level. It's like Diamond 1 through Diamond 3 or something, where sometimes people will do things and they sort of do it half, like they're like, I'm going to attack, but I maybe spend my money on some, shield batteries at home. And then I send half my army out and it's like, no, you either do it or you don't. If you're going to do a timing, you got to go all in on that timing. If you're not going to do the timing, then don't, expand. And it's an interesting thing that experienced players have that trouble being decisive in those situations. And I think it, like Max was saying, it kind of builds upon not only your instinctual brain power, but also your experience in the game, where if you've played 10,000 30,000 games of StarCraft, you sort of know inherently where you are in certain situations, and okay, this is where I have to go. And especially in such a good example from yesterday's GSL, where there's this proxy, right? And you have to make a decision. If you were in TY's shoes, you have to make a decision. Do you go after that proxy or don't you go after the proxy? And he picked a good decision in that case and went after the proxy. But you have to go in all in on it. Otherwise, he could have defended it, and then he would have lost all these units and lost the game eventually. So it's really interesting to see that. So we have that inherently in our brains. We have this skill of making quick and fast judgments and being decisive if we want to, but we also need to layer on top of that our experiences in StarCraft to build upon that inherent skill.
Yeah, it's almost a question of like, when can you afford to do the analysis? When do you need to just trust that instinctual judgment? And how can you build in more and better snap judgments for the times when you literally cannot afford to sit there kind of doing the math, while the game is still going? It's coming up against that real time aspect again.
I think Nero pointed out pretty well. It was in the pilot show that I did with Nero and the rest regarding the shared US mechanics thing. And he said something that I think pretty sum up some of the things that we're saying here. It's like in StarCraft, it's better that you're very decisive and you do a relatively suboptimal move, rather than thinking long and hard, okay, this is optimal move, and then you're going to do it. Now, by the time you do it, that may not be the optimal move.
Right.
That's what I learned from Dota and all the things. When a teammate goes in, it's just gonna go in. Never half and half and insist you're right. So same thing here in StarCraft. Because it's real time, same thing as Dota, you either just go deny the pylon or defend at home. Oh, there's no half and half. And I've done it myself way back. Like, same situation happened. I scouted the target really early. I'm like, okay, I'm going to pull my report over, ready my marine. At the same time, I'm going to build an engineering bay at home, prepare my turrets. Right? It didn't work quite well. I may even do better simply by putting the SCV that is building the engineering bay to attack the pylon, right? So, this is when I'm like, maybe I shouldn't do that, And all these things kind of build up in terms of experience. And then I started to learn that, okay, there's no way I can deny that pylon. Because of my build, I do not have because I'm doing expansion, so there's no way I have enough units to do it. And since okay, I'm going to just defend. I scouted and defend. That's it. And I'm just going to double check if he's going to carry out the plan, if I scout it. And that's it. Now I can't simplify it. And it kind of go back to what we're discussing here. Do you evaluate your decision when you're in the game, or do you evaluate your decision after the game, right? Because at the point of time, there's no time to evaluate decisions, right? And my friend just sent me a replay yesterday that she was playing Protoss against Terran, who do some hand and one by. I was like, I was so impressed by her reaction. She saw it, immediately pulled the two socket at the front, just kite backward, right at the main ramp, so the Hannons cannot drive by. I was like, how do you react so quickly? Like, you see the Hannon on the spot, you immediately know which direction you kite, and you hold at the right time. Like, it's a matter of 1 or 2 seconds. That's even lower than 2 seconds probably. I was so impressed, and she was like, it's instinct. If you got to think about it, you lose. And that's where I kind of think about, that's a good example when I come to the show today, right? A lot of this decision making in the game is when you have to think about it for RTS like so quick, like StarCraft, you may have it too late for it, right? And the only time that maybe thinking start to help is, you have this really, really late game. You have this kind of slow stimulate. Like, you have some brute wars, and I have some goals, and like it gives slows now, and it's like, what should I do now, right? But after all, the instinct is more important, like kind of what Nero say, because once you don't do what you think is right, it's no longer right, because the things change in the battlefield.
Right. I think you touched on something really interesting here, which is the ways in which performing the evaluation of your decision making while you're still in the game can hurt you. The only thing I think I totally agree with everything that you said, and the only thing that I can add to it is that for players like myself who are very kind of emotionally driven, doing that evaluation while you're in the game of, oh, I just made that decision, that was so stupid, can actually kind of tilt you and can make you play worse, or particularly if you are playing in a tournament that is in front of an audience, or if you're streaming your ladder session, that a bunch of people just watched you make that decision that you now think is stupid. And the fact that you're spending mental cycles kind of doing that analysis is only making you feel worse, feel more embarrassed, more self-critical, and now you're like way off your game before you even realized. So another
Yeah, and I want to
oh, go ahead.
I want to add just one thing to what you said there, and I think this is really great points about how decision making and thinking happens in StarCraft. And I've noticed with myself when I play off race, and my main race being Protoss, if I play off race, I almost don't have the mental capacity to do anything but the basic things like macroing if I play Terran, for example, because I haven't automated enough of the tasks. And so it's actually funny because with Terran, sometimes I'm more decisive than with Protoss because I don't have time to really debate myself. Whereas Protoss, I'm like, well, I can do macroing in the background. Do I really want to move over there? Should I really take this seriously? And I can have like a whole conversation with myself. So it is kind of interesting that you sort of, when you start automating more and more tasks in StarCraft, you can create this mental space, which, like you're saying, in your case, in front of an audience, you're berating yourself or thinking about how the audience is berating you for making a bad decision. And then all of a sudden things got worse because of that. And it's funny that, when you start automating, you think, well, it just should get easier, but no, it actually gets harder.
Yeah, I think there's this Dunning-Kruger effect thing, but in this case, it's not exactly the Dunning-Kruger, but the curve that it has on it kind of fits well with what you're saying here. Like when you are kind of not as good, you are more focusing on what I can click, right? Rather than what I can do in the game itself. It's not automated. And then it's like, well, yeah, I'm just going to attack. You don't even think about whether the attack's correct. It's like, did I spread wide enough on my concave? If you kind of focus on different things, first on your clicking, do I, clicking the right thing? Do I have the right hotkey and stuff? And then just because of you being so, novice, you're more decisive, like you say. So you kind of, the result actually show it, you do pretty well. But when you become more automatic, you start to think, like timing of it, different aspect of it. And then you start to drop a little bit in your progress as you climb the ladder, right? So it's kind of like the better you get, actually, it does not reflect on your ladder points as you drop a little bit. And then once you have things sticking a bit more, kind of go back again. It's like the Dunning-Kruger curve. So that's pretty representative of the dilemma of being better.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm very curious, Max. You had a note here, our show notes, about sort of being systematic in the way that we kind of think about cause and effect. You want to kind of give us your ideas there?
Oh yes. So in psychology, every there's this saying, right? Everyone is a naive psychologist because we always think about why. It's like everyone has theory, so to say. We attribute, why did the pen drop on the floor? Because I touch it, it just dropped on the floor, right? And it also leads to why human, way back, you have all these superstitions. It kind of passed down generation as well. It's way back. People are less well versed in science. It's not like, oh, it must be something strange. There has to be a cause to it. Inherently everybody know, but you don't know the cause because people are less advanced in science, right? You can explain certain things. So we just have to attribute a cause to it, and it becomes an external power, for example, right? And it occurs a lot even now when everybody is so relatively knowledgeable in science that something happened, there must be why. And that's where the kind of system kicks in. Instinctively, you attribute the why to it. And there are a lot of other reasoning that can affect how you attribute to the why. And one of the most notable one is when. When something happened, you always trace back. It's always before, right? The causes, it cannot be later. You always trace back. But events that's closer to the outcome, you attribute to be more likely to cause that outcome, right? Even though it may not be the main reasons, it's way back, maybe you did not scout, right? Way back at the starting first minute of the game, but not like in the 7-minute game when you make a push and then you're doing work kind of thing, right? So, but that's when you need to think about cause and effect systematically. What exactly is the cause to the outcome? And that's how it kind of leads on to a lot of some of the society issue that we have. People think about cause and effect not systematically. It's just like, because this elicits this is bad or is good. And I think compared to some like scientists, which I'm not trying to bring it in a wrong manner, just that people are trained systematically. Like, so you look at data, say, look at multiple regression, right? You have multiple factors, all of them may or may not affect something, right? It doesn't cause something. But even if they do, one may affect the outcome more than the other one, right? It kind of indirectly training you to think about cause and effect in a certain manner. But it says, oh, it has to be that thing. Oh, it has to be that thing, right? You kind of doubt yourself more and think about relative, like maybe this causes that more than the other one. And both may have effect, for example. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, along these lines, I think one of the things that jumps out at me is people who lose a game and they immediately get angry about balance, right? So, I lose a game at 12 minutes Oh, well, obviously it's because Broodlords are just ridiculously broken and there's no way that I can beat them. And it's what you said, like did you look at 3 minutes in the game where, your opponent's teching really aggressively and you didn't do anything or even find out that they're, going just straight up to tier 3 tech and rushing Broodlords, right? Um I think the other thing that jumped out in a very similar way as a streamer, this is like the thing that causes every argument between every streamer and their Twitch chat, right? Because chat loves to tell you that you had Storm but you needed Colossus, or you had Colossus but you needed Storm. And many times I'll be reviewing a replay and try to go back and look for these little things. Oh, did I like not put probes into gas properly, and so I couldn't take my robo on time, so my timing attack was late, and all of a sudden the Terran now is doing whatever they want, right? And chat will tell me, oh, your army control was poor. Well, sure, maybe it was, but I'm pretty sure that I lost the game because I didn't put probes in my gas right away. And I think being able to train yourself to look for that is really, really difficult. And I think as a streamer, it can be really hard because there is that inherent bias. And I know that some piece of me wants to feel like I'm right about the reason that I lost the game, right? Like it gives me a sense of control if the thing that I think is important and the thing that I think I should focus on was the reason that I lost. And I feel like, usually I'm right because I try to read these books and, fight against my biases and use the heuristics like looking for the earlier mistakes and so forth. But chat could be right. Chat could be telling me, hey, yeah, sure, you didn't saturate that gas on time, your tech was late, but man, did you mishandle that fight. And even with your other mistakes, if you didn't just move command your army past their army, you actually could have won the game. So I think that's kind of another nuance when you're interacting with other people. You're fighting their biases and your own, which can make it really, really complicated, especially when you're trying to like put on a show too and kind of keep things moving. You don't want to just argue with chat.
Yeah, and you hit on an interesting point that's it's prevalent in I think all esport, competitive video games and all esports, where players, especially at lower levels, will attribute why a game was won or lost to sort of the wrong thing. They have this confirmation bias that they, like Max is saying, it's the most recent thing they saw, and so therefore that is why Team A lost the match. Whereas there may have been 10 things that happened before that, and I think Neuro does a really good job of trying to point these things out, especially on his stream when he's looking at his own replays of going back to, did we miss inject cycles? Did we miss, workers, something like that? Where there are decisions that were made early on that kind of dominoed later into the game and caused him to be behind or lose the game. And it's tough, right? Because if you go to the forums, if you go to Team Liquid, you go to Reddit, you go to Twitter, you will see people complaining about battle cruisers and broodlords and vipers, and you pick a unit. Every race has something that somebody wants to complain about, and I can completely identify with the being on stream and somebody saying, "Well, if you'd only made, carriers." And it's like, well, yeah, in that moment, if I had 8 carriers, that would have been awesome. But I needed to start carriers 5 minutes ago. And I didn't, right? So like, here's where we're at. That's not part of the game. And so we get in this mindset in StarCraft, particularly where there are, units that just kind of win, or units that feel broken when you're learning to fight against them, and you attribute that to why you lost rather than your lack of good macro and spending and worker production and all the supply blocks. And just the things that us like below masters or GM players often have issues with is mainly like supply blocks, workers, and spending money. It's not really like concaves of the army and whether you EMP'd properly. But yet that's what a lot of people will focus on. And unfortunately, in our scene, that through Wings of Liberty, definitely, a lot of the trainers that you see in the arcade of StarCraft 2 are focused on those things that aren't actually as important as the early game mistakes that we tend to make. So it's like, micro control the big army. And it's like, well, that is important. However, it seems to me that it could be less important than other things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. I think you guys have a very good point. I particularly like the point of how do we handle our own biases in evaluation of decision making, or generally why we lost, plus the biases that other people have when they give us feedback, right? And many people are, they're not that, should I say, take to think that no, I'm always right, other people's feedback that's bad. Many people are like, okay, I'm gonna be positive, I'm gonna learn, right? Take feedback on board. But at the same time, they're human just like you, they're biases. And how can we put both together and get the best outcome, right? And it goes beyond StarCraft. Think about this, like at work, you have people giving feedback, and like biases can occur in many ways. For example, how about their motivation? Oh, they're competitors. Man, they're going to give me feedback. They're going to screw me up. Or like, oh, I did good enough. To give me feedback about this. Or maybe they have like the expertise, the best intention, but they are still human being that they see things on their perspective, but they kind of not see things in your side, right? So it kind of drawn some very good point of how can we balance the biases over the two. That's really important. And the other thing that I think is really interesting in StarCraft is that is kind of one thing leads to another. So if you did not put the workers in the gas, adding sort of crumble because the ratio is wrong, you didn't put certain things right, the build doesn't work, so on and so forth. Just keep the error start to expand bigger and bigger, right? And for me, I see myself as a very poorly mechanic driven player. Like my mechanics are so poor, right? So whenever I lost a game, instinctively I think, oh, it's because of my mechanics. It's always my mechanics. But although my mechanics is average at best, at my level, is still a lot of things I can improve on in terms of like, why do I move out here? When do I do this? Can I split my army better? Or should I transition the tech earlier, and so on and so forth, right? A lot of things is not so much just mechanics, but instinctively, because I know deep down, I did rationalize that, oh, because of mechanics. Perhaps it does like half of like 50% of the failures, why I lost. But a lot of other things is like maybe my decision making, my strategy, or some of the meta game moves I did not make, right? But because I kind of rely so much on my instinct that my mechanics sucks, oh, it has to be my mechanics. And I can't overlook some aspect of my strategy that I did not improve on it. And I'd be like, oh, no, I should have attacked. If I have better mechanics, I still can overrun them. It doesn't really matter, right? Because my mechanics really well, I supply block for like 1 minute, all these things. So it kind of require me to stop like, okay, although my mechanics sucks and it play a big role on my defeat, I need to rationalize, okay, how can I do better here in decision making? And someone actually kind of point out that, well, in a game like StarCraft, mistakes bound to happen, even the top pros, right? How can we make the decision best with a mistake we've made in that situation? So for example, early supply block, right? I cannot change that. How can I, with what I have, although right now I should hit a timing, right? That's a strategy whole thing. But because of that, I cannot hit the timing. And what can I do from there, right? I think that's a big lesson that I learned along the way. I remember this one game I played in Heartless, so I'm like, I have it's a TBT. I still remember this very clearly. Where I spawned was a map and so on. So I have this, my factory, tank so important in TBT, right? I have building next to it so the tank cannot spawn. And I did not realize it, right? So even pros have that, I just keep, why do I only have Marine and Manifest? Something's not right. I have like 10 tanks and I have like 2 tanks. Something's not right. And then when I realized that, oh shit, and then our opponent started to push over across the map. I was like, there's no way in hole, right? Because no tanks. I was like, what can I do now? So I sent one drop to Shogun space to delay as much as I can. And because I have more Marines now, because I kind of stuck the tank. There's no tank, and I started to spread the marine into like 4 groups around the map. So once I push out with all the tanks, when I have no tanks, I can just do like 360s around, and it work. But if I kind of my mechanic sucks, but I just going to stick onto normal strategy, whereby if I have 3 tanks, which are the good places, and I still get overrun, right? So a lot of these things whereby mid-tier casual players should really take into account when they play the game. Like, yep, it's bad. Yes, I think it's good that you admit it, but when you play the game, how can we accommodate that into the decision making that we do in the game? That can help us improve a lot.
Yeah, that's a really great point. The part about, saying, okay, I made that mistake, and now I'm going to evaluate the game state, having made this mistake, and choose whatever is optimal from here. I think, for one, it's just the right thing to do strategically, right? it's it's almost the only thing that you can do, right? You evaluate game state to game state as things change, and you continue to try to make the optimal decision. But I think where people can also get a lot out of that are the folks like me, again, who are really emotional players who can be really hard on themselves after making a mistake. If you have that sort of little mental trick to say, okay, made that mistake, not happy about it, wasn't good, but what can we do from here? It almost kind of takes that tension away and gets you out of being self-critical and more into the space of, all right, well, now let's just be optimistic again and say, what is the best thing that I can do from this kind of weird, messy situation that I've gotten myself into? And you really can do some kind of awesome stuff. I actually, similar, I like that you remembered this game, right? From like an expansion ago. I have a similar memory of a game that I played. I think it was a PvZ, and I was in Silver League, maybe Silver 3. And this was back when I still played a couple of games occasionally off of stream. And, down at that rank, you and your opponent are just doing whatever you're doing and running those two things into one another and seeing what wins, right? And so in my case, I had like a few adepts, and my opponent had a million zerglings, like just so many zerglings. And I knew that my adepts weren't going to make it. So I shaded them onto my opponent's ramp. I'd never done this before in my life. I was like, what is this shade ability even for? I didn't understand. And my opponent tried to still attack them. And they sat there with a million lings at the bottom of the ramp and just fed them into the meat grinder that were my adepts with no surface area. And I ended up killing their entire army. And my opponent, like, before they even GG'd, they typed out a couple of sentences to me about how smart that was and how they're not even mad that they lost. They're just so impressed. And I'll never, never forget that. That was just a really, really fun kind of newbie game, I suppose. But, like in that situation, if I didn't have that intuition you're talking about, where I thought, okay, this is really bad. I'm going to lose my army. I only have a couple of adepts and opponent has so much stuff. Instead, I went, all right, what can we do? It's time to learn how to use these shades, I guess, and just kind of tried it. Yeah, I think that's really cool.
I think this is a very good life lesson. Like mistakes happen. At work, this kind of occurred this year. So I was working on a research team. That this guy, he's a research assistant. He made some mistakes, right? And he was so scared that he's gonna get a big scolding and so on and so forth. But like the rest of the team, like, okay, cool. What can we do for now? Like no one saying anything bad towards him. Like, and everybody started putting forward things like proposed solutions, and he was so shocked that wait, something is not right here. And I think it's a really good life lesson that I kind of learned from StarCraft, like being rational and stuff. And it's particularly easy to be rational thinker like this. Like, okay, mistakes happen. You can't change that. What can we do now? It's a lot easier when the mistakes are made by other people sometimes compared to yourself. So I think when I make my mistakes, I talk to some coworkers like, man, I'm so sorry. I kind of screwed up the experiment here, the small part here, and so on and so forth. And they'd be like, no, it's okay. What can we do here? But when I'm on the other side, I do the same thing. So it's a lot of like whose perspective you look at. So for my own benefit, I'm like, even when I make mistake, I try to tell myself, okay, you know, let's move on. What can I do from here? Like that's something I need to consciously. It's hard to kind of just like cancel the bias. It's almost impossible.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense.
Yeah, and I think just to add to what you both have said, and this sort of rolls into the next bullet point that I wrote out is the quantifying our predictions. That in Max, you said it when you were talking about your games, where you're talking about your mechanics aren't where you want them to be, and so you often would blame your mechanics for the problems, but really you have to dig deeper sometimes to find what the issue is. And I think coaches can be really good in this, and we've read some of the books that we've had that talk about coaching. And coaches or somebody that's removed from the direct connection to the game, because we have this in StarCraft. I think we've all had a game or two, maybe once in a while, where we've gotten a little angry, and you have this emotional connection to the gameplay, and you also have this bias of what you think you did wrong, what you think is the problem. And a coach or somebody who's removed from that game can look at it objectively and identify those problems. Or like, in your case of your research group, a supervisor, or, if your assistant makes a problem, well, somebody who's removed from the guilt of that problem or the embarrassment of that problem can say, well, how do we fix this? Let's identify what we need to do next. And I think coaching is really good. If you have a coach that recognizes that, right, you have to pick your coach wisely, but coaching can be really good in that they will help identify things that you wouldn't see because of your own biases, filtering out those things that you've done wrong. And in the book Superforecasting, there's quite a bit of content in there about how to quantify your predictions, and that a lot of people will make predictions and use kind of flowery language to sort of hide the fact that they're not going to quantify their predictions. And this is something I thought about in StarCraft. So how do we apply this to StarCraft? One way I thought about it was like, your post-game analysis, your replay analysis, right? If you look at your replays, like, I thought X was going to happen. Did X happen? Is that really what the build order was? But I've never kept track of it personally. And I think that that's something that I might try after reading this book that could be kind of beneficial to a lot of StarCraft players. And in addition to looking at replays, but sort of like Eric, you do this on your stream of your focus goals. How many times did you predict correctly, and what was your confidence in that prediction? Did you say I got an 8 out of 10 on this? Player's going for mutas. Like, my opponent is definitely going for mutas, and it turns out I was wrong. And how often am I wrong? And I think that's something that would be really interesting to tabulate for a game like StarCraft, where we predict things every single game because we don't have complete information.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. I think there's a few nuances here. So one is the scoping of the prediction itself. So I send a probe out, and the Terran has done the double supply depot thing, and I can't get in. They say, no, you can't visit my house. You don't get to find out what I'm up to. And so one thing that I could say for sure is my opponent does not want me to have information, right? What I can't say is this is definitely 100% a concussive shell marauder proxy rush, right? Like, that's highly specific. Maybe I could say this is a cheese, right? So depending on the prediction that I'm writing, right, I need to be more careful about potential cheese, and I need to prioritize gaining more information, right? I can apply a higher degree of confidence to that versus, oh, it's totally marauders, let me counter marauders specifically. So that's kind of one piece. The other piece is, how certain are you that it is any given thing, right? And this is kind of what the book talks about. It. The other piece is kind of me editorializing about StarCraft, right? But the book itself really, really highly underscores the point that a lot of times people will just, as you say, use flowery language and say, oh, this will definitely happen, or it is likely that such and such will occur. when in reality, we should be using the most granular estimate that we can. So if I start thinking, oh, it's 50-50 versus maybe it's 70-30, once I start using more fine-grained percentages, oh, it's 85% to happen. Now I'm using my tools a little bit better. But this is kind of why I wanted to get you guys' opinions on it, because I'm not sure how to actually use that in StarCraft. If I say, oh, it's really popular, it's in vogue right now on the ladder to do this concussive push. I'm just making things up. Because such and such pro used it in the GSL last week. Okay, therefore I'm going to say it's 85% concussive marauder push. How do you think about that, Max? Do you have any thoughts there?
Right. So here's an interesting thing. Like reading all these books, you know, I sort of know from the experts that okay, you should do this to improve your margin, right? Like, never go very likely, or 85%, right? 85% is better than very likely. But at the same time, because you cannot have data to say like, well, it's 85%, not 80%. We don't have data for this. So when we say in percentage, it's a lot more about within subject uh, field, should I say, right? Is to tell ourselves, maybe this likelihood is higher than the other likelihood, right? Kind of force us to make a trade-off in my mind. That's how I see in a more practical sense. Because we can never know, right, whether it's 80, 70, and so on, right? Unless you do like, big enough sample size. And the metagame change, like, not so much. And there'll be individual differences of how we see percentage as well. So that's how I see it. And that's the reason why when we communicate percentage to other people in terms of prediction, it also always seems a little bit off, I mean, beyond social aspect of it, right? People seem that you're awkward and so on, but it has this, it's not that informative, it doesn't mean that much. Although when you said 80%, people in their mind, like, oh, right, very likely, right? Compared to 50%, like, oh, right, you're not sure. That's what I'm trying to say, right? People don't think in a numeric way. 50% means very different from, you're not sure. Right? Actually, it's a pretty high percentage if you think about it, right? It's a coin flip. People don't think about it that way. So when we communicate percentage to people or even to ourselves, it means very different thing. That's how I look at it. But like you say, right, when you think about builds, uh, what is the percentage? And there are other issues with it. I try to do that in a spreadsheet so I can have a keep track of the meta game that I play. In my level, what people are going to do, right? For example, like against Protoss, what's the first tag? Do they, or if they go down, they go bling, right? So I have a keep track of it. So I have a gauge in the next game because I have no idea who the opponent is, the history of it. So my existing knowledge of that player is an average of what I played, right? That makes more sense. But at the same time, in StarCraft if I do that, I have to force a categorization of what opponent does. And that can be good, can be bad. You see what I'm trying to say? Especially say you play against Zerg. How can I quantify? All right, you do this on 40 drones. You do this on 50 drones. It's the same thing, similar thing. It's quite different, right? When you get better, you can see the difference compared to say like, all right, do you do 1-1-1? All right, you do 1-1-1 like do you do 2-man job, 3-man job with a Helen? Like, you see what I'm trying to say? There's a bit of nuances to it, and it's kind of hard to quantify it. Because if I do like, okay, there's a 20% chance it's 2 with the man job, and then you have 10% chance that 2 with the man 1 Helen. But what if I swap out the sequence, right? The Helen is the second unit produced or the first unit produced. Like, the more you know, it becomes a burden of knowledge. Like, you can see all these nuances among all these options. It's very hard to categorize them. And that's kind of a struggle to put a percentage to these things. And I just like, all right, I'm going to give on that. And I kind of like, okay, more grand scheme of things. All right, do you go for this in general, or do I go for that in general? And then I kind of narrowed down to how do I categorize things by, is it more offensive, or do I need something that to react immediately? Right, I can't categorize that manner. Become more practical, but something that I can react to it. rather than like, okay, person is going to do this, do that, but I'm not going to change my build, so I just categorize them together. And then I always have this others, but I have no idea what person is going to do, right? So that's what I do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think this is something that the players who coach me have been trying to get me to understand that, maybe I think of, this for me very scary scenario where a Terran's doing something, but I don't know what. In my head, it becomes this pie chart with like many, many, many sections, right? Because there's so many different flavors of, you know, weird attack that might be coming. But the reality is that, while maybe it is 15% here, 20% there, 15 for this build, 18 for that, maybe the actions that I'm going to take aren't that different in, the first like 4 variations of it, right? It's like some amount of proxy barracks, and there's going to be stuff coming to your base, so you probably want like units and maybe a shield battery or two, and so then it's more of a game of, as you say, bring it back to kind of that intuition, like, okay, fairly likely that it is some strong aggression. I need to invest in defenses, and depending on, how much I'm able to figure out about how much aggression, I'll add more or less defenses. And I think that does kind of that does speak to it, but it also still leaves me wondering, how can I use more of the super forecasting, tech, right? These ideas from the book,
Mm.
because it does feel like a lot of time I don't have the information, I don't have time to do the kinds of calculations that I might want to, and maybe the answer is just what you're talking about with, spreadsheets after the fact.
Yeah, I think you have to. Yeah, exactly like what Max is saying, that this is something that has to be post game analysis. It can't be in the game. And like we've indicated with some of the other examples, that if you try and do this judgment call in the game, you're going to mess up your decision making, and then you're not decisive, and that just rolls into other problems. And it's an interesting problem. And while both of you were talking, I was thinking about it, that it might be the case that thinking about more big picture things is more important than and there are alarms, like police driving by my house, so I can hear it. There's thinking big picture things is easier to quantify in terms of predictions than it is this a 3 racks or 2 racks? Is this a 55 drone or 45 drone all in? Whereas the prediction is this is an all in, and that's much easier to quantify. And it kind of reminds me of a couple seasons ago in the GSL, when every Protoss in the world was doing 2 base all-ins or 3 base all-ins versus Zerg with 1, 2, 3, or 4 immortals and a bunch of sentries, and it was every single game, which was really boring to watch. But every Protoss was doing it because that's all they had in their toolkit at the time. The thinking was that was the way to win. And Artosis and No Regret did a really good in-depth analysis on those builds, and they found that the variety of builds were so hard to predict, even if you had full scouting information. And so quantifying those predictions, is it a 1 immortal or is it a 3 immortal, is nearly impossible for a human. But you can quantify, okay, this is a 2 base all in with immortals generally, and then how do I prepare for that? So some things maybe are just going to be a lot harder to predict at a high confidence, and some things maybe are nearly impossible. But my feeling is the post analysis is going to be really important.
And I think at the highest level pros, especially in the series, right, there's a lot of accessibility to each other's game. Even if we have access to it, I'm sure they do. And it becomes a lot of interesting mind game and planning to make use of the things that we just said. So the best example I think of is last season, TY was parting, whereby everybody's party just fall apart because it was children the cheese the first 2 games. And I mean, in a way, you can make the claim, but there's so much interesting thing that TY did that goes beyond about his own series planning, but more about thinking about what parting knows. So it kind of leads on to what you say about Terran just have a too early depot to block off. You can't see it. Now, so when you say like almost anything is possible, right? Essentially anything is possible because you don't even know the number of gas, right? For all you know is one barracks, two command center. So they're 3CC, right? For all you know. Or like what we've seen yesterday, the new one whereby Theo was this, he proceeded 2 more barracks elsewhere, no gas, just Marine and SCB. What T1 did against Party 1 season ago is the first game, he proceeded Marauders. Right, so 2 barracks, proceeded Marauders. And then Party kind of sense like, if I cannot get information in your base, then maybe information I can deduce by scouting other areas on the map, right? So deduce, his scout, but he just happened to miss it, right? So, well, depends on how you see it, whether he can control his probe because there's no luck that you can see it, or just it's luck that he didn't see it, right? But that's another debate. The point is, he was like, okay, I just died to it because I did not prepare enough for the Marauder rush, right? So, and think about this now. Next game, TY did a very similar opening from Parting's perspective. 1 barracks at the ram, 2 depot. They don't see shit. Okay, so Parting ran on to scout the map. It makes sense. Like, for instance, what can you do, right? You scout the map. But at the same time, how are you going to prepare for the unpredictable, right? So you start building, shield battery in his natural and more barracks ran up. And all that makes sense, right? So from his perspective, I think this is how he thinks. So you have to adapt to available information. So last game, Marauder coming to your base, right? And the attack comes from the front. And on the same week, right, Barney did a build whereby he kind of just something Wolf early, but expand. With a Reaper, the same thing basically. Like a typical build. So if you have your seal battery and your natural, like, well, it's inefficient and so on and so forth, but Terra is inefficient in delaying the CC early on and then leave it out. So it kind of balance it out. And then innovation. In the same week, it did a 1 base 1 push with tanks by warning off early, right? Again, having the shield battery at your natural helps, right? From all this push. So Parting's decision to build a shield battery at the natural makes sense for all the different variations that's possible. And that's where TY's brilliance comes in. And on that map, there's a blind spot, you can shove a Helens and you can't see it. And it's not attacking from natural. So TY is such a brilliant, tactician in that sense that it not just the game that I just played against you, or the meta game, generally you can see what Terran do, but the map and all these things that is a spot, that is not coming from the front, that's gonna steal me the game. Same opening, you don't see shit. So I think that's wow, like that's so brilliant, right? From decision-making perspective, from Parting's perspective, the available information that Parting has, so on and so forth.
Yeah, very cool. I feel like if Adricet doesn't stop us, this is going to turn into the TY fan club because I think I love him as much as Max does.
Yeah,
He's an amazing player. Yeah, those games. I love how Max, you got just a depth of all the games in your head of like, oh yeah, and as you're saying, I'm like, yeah, I remember that game, but I couldn't off the top of my head recall him. But yeah, TY is an incredible player.
So we kind of touched on this already a little bit, the notion of, when do I trust my intuition? When do I kind of sort of second guess that as, maybe bias? And I think these anecdotes that we're talking about, right? These like interesting tactical tournament plays kind of feed into that. Do either of you have thoughts on, when is it right to trust your gut? Because there's nothing worse than that feeling of, oh, my gut told me it was this cheese and I didn't react to it,
I would go first. I think it's kind of the game theory. So you have some options. I think a good example is TVT, for example, is scouted that opponents go for Cloak Banshee because it's Cloak at a support. And of course, it can be fake, right? So now here's the thing. Fake, not fake, right? Let's simplify the outcome. And on your side, if you guess correct, like whether it's fake or not fake, you start to balance the 4 possible outcomes, right? Because 2 by 2. And game theory that okay, what's the best out of 4 on average, right? So I think that helps to decide. You just trust intuition, like for TVT for Cloak, I'm like I'm just gonna trust that because I cannot afford to not react against Cloak Banshee, just lose a game, you know. So that's where I thought like intuition matters, and it goes back to some of the other meta game issues. So it's got a I think this is the example that I used in my article, whereby it's got integrity, it's got no barracks, upon space. Guess taken, intuition it would be, and it's fair one, proxy Reapers. Right, because that's the most popular one. I mean, if you have to give a percentage, like with data, it's fair to say it's 80%, probably around there, right? And from that, statistically speaking, it makes sense to react against proxy reapers, right? And at the same time, that's intuition, and intuition is not like come from nowhere, right? It comes from experience, comes from knowledge, so you might instantly be proxy reapers. One thing that people do not discuss enough about balancing intuition and doubting it is what you think about intuition is the timing of it and the severity of it. So, like I said, the Banshee example, this how severe it is, right? And then the other example that I just have talked about is the grass move, is dangerous as a lion, right? I'm not going to deduct my intuition. I'm going to back off first. Yeah, I'm going to think about it, right? No, it's not worth the risk. So for Proxy Reaper, it comes so early. If you do not full on defend against it, prepare for it, you die on the spot because it hits so early, like 2 milliseconds again, right? But compared to other things like, it can be proxy 111, tank push. There's more time for you to prepare for it. So rather than just like, what if it is not proxy Reaper? Now I'm going to prepare for other things, right? You should follow intuition first, then you update your probability for something that is less severe at that point of time, is early compared to other options. Which I think is very, very important in StarCraft.
Yeah, that is an excellent point, and I think oftentimes, at least this has been my observation, those early preparations, right? So whether it's okay, I'm going to get a zealot, right? That could apply to like a PVZ as well. My opponent got the super early pool. I'm going to get a zealot. It isn't like getting that zealot is a total waste, right? If, we get to a few minutes go by into the game, no Reaper shows up, I'm like, what's the deal? Well, now I have something I could send out around the map and I can go looking for, okay, is there tech hidden? Does my opponent have a hatchery in like a really weird spot? So as you say, the cost oftentimes of taking these preparatory measures for the really extreme, really early things often isn't that much. Unless it's something like the TY, brilliant tactical example of, aha, I will punish you actually for making that battery at your natural. I found the one way to do it.
Yeah, I think one way then intuition. So it's interesting to bring this question up because the example that Max gave is really telling in that you go and you scout nothing, right? You scout the opponent and you see no production. So you're really in the dark of what's going on, as opposed to scouting and seeing partial information or something like that. And so one thing you can do is you can trust your gut and say, it's proxy reapers. I'm going to defend against proxy reapers. But at the same time, it also could be good to send a scout out to go find the proxy, right? And so I think a lot of lower level, I'm guilty of this as well. Lower level players will see some information or see lack of information, use their intuition, assume it's something, and then they don't ever scout more. They don't get more information to confirm. They just go with their gut. And I'll say the funny one is like if you ever watch M. Canning stream and he's playing a Zerg, the Zerg is always going mutas, and that's the meme, right? The Zerg's always going mutas. When do they not go mutas? Because he doesn't like mutas. And it's even if he's scouted and there's no spire anywhere, he'll be like, are they going mute us? And that's the thing, is that, you know, your intuition can tell you a lot. But for at least me, I know that I have to also remember to confirm and to get more information, keep trying to confirm and improve that prediction, because that intuition can carry you pretty far, especially early in the game. But as there's more and more information available to you, if you're not using it, you're definitely going to set yourself behind, and your predictions get weaker and weaker.
Yeah, I think the books touch on this as well, particularly Superforecasting, the notion of seeking out ways to update your prediction as you're able to, you know, gain more and more insight on what's happening, right? You read a news article and you go, oh, okay, you know, I'm actually going to tweak my percentage from 85% to 75, you know, based on this other thing occurring.
From personal experience, right? So going back to the proxy reaper example, I'm going to tell a story, and then I'm going to lead on to a very interesting behavioral standpoint. So I scouted no barracks, and like, okay, Reaper. And actually, on the spot, I thought about this. What if it's not Reaper? You know, because I play against Proxy Marauders, and the idea of Proxy Marauder is a real good counter to this thinking, right? Because people think it's Proxy Reaper, so Proxy Marauder, you know, it changes how you defend against it slightly, or should I say? So I thought, okay, you know, what if it's Proxy Marauders? But never mind, you know, like I just said, you kind of deal with the immediate threat first, and Proxy Marauder slightly later, so to say. So immediately I just kind of stopped and like, Reaper, no, don't feel it. Okay, no Reaper coming. All right, build a bunker at the ramp, right? Next thing, right? Marauders, it kind of makes sense. Now, if Marauder doesn't come, then probably it's 1-1-1, right? Proceed 1-1, like, because gas can, unless you build a gas and then put all the rockets out of gas and expand, I'm like, I'm just going to clap, okay? Because you're even efficient at the end, so it's fine. So that's what I was thinking. I thought, oh, man, I'm so bloody smart, you know? I have all this plan already done. And guess what? I was like, no Marauders coming. Okay, I'm going to send my Reaper and SC around Madness out, right? What proxy do you have? What proxy torch drop, you know? Okay, be innovative for all you want. And guess what? I have Marauder, I think, attacking me at the back of my base. That guy left the barracks at the back of my base. 3 barracks, Marauders. I was like, I just clapped on the spot. I was like, cool, you know? And that shows that I rely a lot on my knowledge. That, you know, I've all these, okay, Reaper, Proxy Marauders, Proxy 1-1-1, like, these are the make sense things that Terran can do. I mean, for all you think they can do is they can proxy 2 Stopper, right? But I did not take that into account at the same time. So I never ever thought of proxy barracks inside my base. Right? Never thought it. I was like, okay, you know, I learned something. And that's when, going back to the book, right, I update my probability into my list in my mind, right? Okay, that may be proxy barracks in my base. And guess what? 1 month later, same thing happened. You know, and I was like, instinctively go for Reapers, defending against it, and I go through the same cycle again. And then the same proxy bloody around in my face. I was like, I want to punch myself. Like, I know this, you know. In my mind, I updated it, right? But I still lose to it. It didn't occur to me in my mind. I was like, well, but what can you do? But all I need to do is just send one SCV to the back of my base and back. You know, it's not like I need to build something. It's just simple thing that I can react to, right, to deal with things. And I was like, why? Like, why am I so stupid? You know, like, I know it. Like, first one, I'm like, okay, not a surprise. You know, sometimes, you know, fair enough, right? The first time. Second time, I was like, huh, it's so hard to update our instinct, our intuition. And that's where I kind of, you know, it sounds like a little brag. Like, you know, the more knowledgeable you are, it becomes a burden that is very, very hard to update and change the existing knowledge or paradigm that you have, because you keep making assumptions that you do not know you make. You know, and it goes beyond the StarCraft, right? So I think that is great. And yesterday I was watching Teja's stream. It did exactly the same thing. I was like, oh, you know, when Proxy Marauder attacking back, I just can't stop laughing, because it happened to the top most extreme pros. You know, same thing happened to me.
Funny. Yeah, that's great. I think definitely having that sort of list, right? Say, okay, the most extreme thing is this. It didn't happen. I think where I struggle is having that trigger for, okay, it's this time in game. The Reaper should have been here by now. It's time to update to like the step 2 cheese, right? That I think is what I'm struggling with. But I think the framework that you lay out is very, very sound, right? And then it just becomes a matter of, like you say, having it happen to you enough times, I think, that you can actually go, okay, wait, I got to do that little check around my base thing. And as you say, like even the pros can get gotten by these things.
Yeah, not enough pain to learn the lesson.
Mm-hmm.
I need to lose more
Exactly.
points of that first.
Well, that's one of the things about StarCraft that we have to go through. There's all these things we can do to make ourselves improve, but there is this underlying database you have to develop of, you may see a build for the first time and just not know how to counter it. And I think one example I can think of that happened a couple of years ago was somebody for just like a day was doing mass sentry on the NA ladder in the Grandmaster leagues and was beating people. Dude, just only mass sentry and was beating people, and it was like the weirdest thing ever, but it worked because nobody had seen it before, so nobody really knew what to do against it. And so you do have to build that database up, and sometimes depending on how how hard it is to get it into your head, you might have to lose to proxy marauders a couple times before you remember to scout for them or remember what to do against them.
Yeah, I think people underestimate how good SOS and Haas are. He's like, oh no, he's gonna cheese, all these things. Yeah, imagine you play against him, and you're a top pro, you know something is coming, right? I mean, you should be able to defend in some manner, right? After all, you're top pros, right? If it's that good, everyone will be doing it. That's logic, right? Then why only SOS and Haas kind of always putting off all these tricks? It's because they have such a big arsenal of things that there's just minor differences. The salary is one thing, not the other thing. And then the bam, it's like, okay, it's too late. Even if you learn your lesson, it's so hard to just adjust on the fly in a series.
It's interesting. I think players like that almost have the skill of manipulating the opponent, which
Hmm.
feels so different than the way that the rest of us approach the game, right? We, at least I think the majority think, okay, what is my style? What things do I need to improve? Max, you talked about, mechanics. You're always, on yourself about, oh, my mechanics are poor, I need to improve them. And I think I'm pretty similar in that way. I also have a lot of trouble with just interpreting scouting information and kind of determining what my opponent's going to do. And I think, many of us try to just build up, okay, what are my flaws? How do I improve at these things? How do I get better at playing my game? And it almost feels like those especially creative players are, instead of grinding that skill, they're grinding the skill of like, how can I make my opponent do stuff that's like dumb and wrong? Which is such an to me backwards way of doing it, but obviously they have so much success, right? Like it's interesting to think about.
And that's exactly, if you watched the Florencio files, which is Pig casting Florencio's replays, and Pig is making jokes and he's making a satire of it, but 9 out of 10 of those, the opponent is just doing the weirdest things because they're panicking. They're not making good decisions and they're trying to get tech when they shouldn't be getting tech. And just the oddest things will happen in those games. And Florencio, he notoriously does not have good micro. You can out micro him very easily, but players just have no idea how to deal with his units. And it's really funny to watch because you can almost see somebody's head just kind of explode of like, oh crap, what do I do against this strange build?
Right, yeah. So I guess the next sort of topic that I wanted to bring up is an example from the end of Superforecasting where he sort of dives into the Wehrmacht, the war machine, German army, and the way that they sort of gave authority and autonomy to sort of the boots on the ground, right? The troops who are actually there fighting the battle, kind of empowering them and saying, okay, here's your goal, right? Your goal is to capture this city. Go forth and capture, right? And to not give orders that are highly specific, right? Capture the city by attacking it from the east side and using artillery fire, right? And the reason that they did this, the reason that the Wehrmacht was so efficient, is that if I were to give you such a plan, right, you're going to go attack the city, things are going to change day of that are going to make some aspect of that plan bad or wrong, dangerous, or what have you. And if I haven't empowered you to kind of make your own decisions and think for yourself, then we're going to kind of fall victim to that. For me, I kind of saw a parallel here to StarCraft in the sense that, while it's still just me either way, I started off the game and I said, okay, it's a PvZ. I'm going to do this build, right? But then, right, now the battle's happening and stuff is a little bit weirder than what I expected, right? My opponent's not just doing, okay, hatch guest pool. I'm going to take a nice third hatch. I'm going to follow this happy little tech path. I'm going to try to get a lot of drones. They do something other than that. And now I have to trust me in the game versus me before the game, right? And kind of make decisions on the fly. And so I thought that was a really interesting concept because while, the example in the book is the commander and then the soldier on the field, and in the StarCraft example, it's me from before and me now. I think it maps especially well that you need to be doing this kind of reevaluation to not be too rigid in your thinking.
That's a good point.
Yeah, this is. Oh, go ahead, Max.
No, after you.
It's an interesting thing, and I was just kind of Google searching this because I couldn't remember the term while you were talking, but it's Decentralized Command.
Mhm.
It's still used in the U.S. military, and this idea that if the person making decisions isn't getting the most accurate and most recent information, then they're definitely not going to be making the best decisions. And it's interesting that to think about this in the terms of StarCraft because it's tricky, right? We practice things. Maybe you watch streams or you watch your replays. You kind of take notes, and then you go to play on the ladder, and you have a plan of what you're going to do, but then the game turns into something crazy. And I think probably all of us have experienced times where we're like, today I'm going to practice macroing and taking a third base, and then every game is cheese, right? And there's no way you could even get to a third base. And you're like, I just wanted to practice macro, but instead you had to react and think about what the other player is doing. And the only thing I can think of that comes close to this is, are you familiar with this term, the OODA loop? OODA loop. It's OODA loop. So it's a term that's used in kind of military tactics, and it's observe, orient, decide, and act. And it's designed to, in training for a soldier or a police officer, or anybody who has to do some tactical type of job, to stop and take in information and then make a decision based on that information. Whereas if you fall back on your training, that's like the commander that's not on the battlefield, right? Because that's like, well, what I practiced and this is what I do. And you surely will lose if your opponent is doing something very unusual. For example, if you're in a PvZ, your opponent's going for mutas and you're still going to go for a immortal push with mostly charge lots, well, you're obviously going to lose because you have nothing to counter the mutas, right? Assuming they defend that well. And so it's like you can do that. You can definitely play the game that way, but having that break, and I don't know. I mean, in my experience, that is one of the hardest things to do in StarCraft is to stop, take a moment, and actually reevaluate. I find that very, very difficult to do.
Yeah, I almost wonder if there are strategies that we could specifically use, something like pulling your army back. Before I go, too far down that rabbit trail, I do want to acknowledge Florencio has brought a big old raid. So welcome in, everyone. If you are new, this is the Archives Book Club. We are talking about the books Superforecasting and Thinking in Bets. And we are blessed today to have Max Yu of TerranCraft, a wonderful member of the community, super smart guy, um, behavioral scientist, even to discuss these topics. So we're a few hours in at this point. Got just a few topics to go, but you'll be able to catch this VOD after the fact if you are liking the content. And please check Max out for being kind enough to come on the show with us today. Okay, back to our discussion. Um, yeah, I wonder if we could build in ways to do that OODA loop, right? Is it, just an army pullback, right? I see pros do this all the time where they, they've got their big army and it's kind of like the two balls of army are kind of like engaging, disengaging, engaging, disengaging. And I never knew what that was. I think a lot of times it's oh, okay, who's forming a good concave? All right, I'm going to disengage because it's become slightly favorable for you. But other times, as I've watched high level players in first person, it's, oh, I'm going to go back and do something at my base, right? I'm going to pull back just a little bit, which is both going to give me, maybe some high ground or something, or a better concave or what have you. And also, I just put down some tech. And then I'm going to click back or flip back to my army and kind of push forward. I wonder if you could do the same thing to create that OODA loop a little bit.
I think that's a very good point. I I can't remember which pro say this. So, we have this perception that pros are, they are so fast, they're so good, they can, multitask all this and that. But even then, when you look at their first player view, Little Mario has a cleanest macro and micro, like all these things. You can see he always do certain things to the army, right? To, move in some manner to squeeze out the time that you don't have to look at it, do your macro or do certain things, whereby you can build a command center and so on. And all this kind of add up like, why can you do so many things, right? And why do you don't bank up so much money? It's finding the right time to squeeze out the action and allow you to do something. And a lot of the time is opponent doesn't give you the right time to do it, right? Like you say, okay, I'm not going to engage, but it's like, yeah, I'm going to engage, So I think it kind of become the dance that you mentioned, and there's a very good example here. What I think is kind of interesting is, as a novice, I look at pros, I, naturally I want to, they're so cool, I'm going to play like them, right? Multitask here and there, three-point attack, and when I do that, I fall apart by myself. Opponent don't have to do anything.
Yep.
I just fall apart by myself. And one of my friends keeps saying like, it's not your mechanics that's bad. I mean, I mentioned to say, yeah, actually it's pretty bad, but not, that's not the main point I'm going to say. She was saying like, it's very clear you have a good understanding of the strategy and so on, but you need to play and make moves that is manageable for you, you know. So for example, if T do 5-point attack, you do 3. Okay? Don't try to be too funny with this. You cannot manage, and it's not good for you. And that's when I try to learn this, but like I make a push to the other side of the map. I just A move, and like, all right, at this point of time, T have 2 commands in the build, this and that, and I do that, and then next time, hey, where did my army go? Die somewhere. I never know about this. So I kind of learned the lesson along the way that if I'm going to do that, I'm going to pre-split my army, a concave, just in case my opponent come towards me, and he just click steam, let it deal with it, while I look away from there and do some other things. So a lot of minor things like this happen, and a lot of the time, average player like us have a misconception of how bad the pros are, because we look at it from the observer perspective, whereby the observer shows where all the actions are. And the observers are good players themselves. They know where are the things they need to look at and so on. So their visions are in line with pro players. And when that happens, it's like pro players are everywhere at the same time. Actually, they are not. They're just at a place where the observer are at the point of time, right? So when you watch replay, when you watch first player view, you can see that, right? Even Maru Innovation Zero, there is idling group of units here, island group of units there. They're not doing anything, which they can do more. Is the same problem that we casual players have, right? But they just do a lot better than we do. they literally cannot be at all the places at the same time. So this is how, like, and I started watching replay. I started appreciate it. Okay, I should do what pros do, but in a sense that what I can manage and not just try to engage everywhere at the same time.
Yeah, really excellent point. I think the only thing that I can add there is, there's this notion of, oh, the pros are kind of doing all these actions, right? And I want to macro behind, right? You definitely need to make the adjustments that you're talking about, right? In terms of, okay, I can't handle a 5-prong attack, right? Maybe let's try 2 or 3. I'm not TY. I think there's also a skill in choosing what those adjustments are, right? So in your example of, okay, TY pushes across, he's got this big army, and he takes 2 command centers behind it. Well, okay, which piece is more important, right? Is it more important that the army moves across at that timing, or the CCs go down on time, right? And I think that example is maybe pretty straightforward, but there are a lot of others where it's more nuanced. The only other thought that I had here is, I think this may be one of the reasons why players get stuck after getting like kind of sort of pretty good at the game, right? Like people get stuck in Diamond or low Masters. I think it's because of exactly what you just said, Max, where the things that are differentiating the pro player are these really hard to see nuances of deciding when is it safe to look away and go do something else, and specifically how to weave that in. And that is so much harder to find, whether you're watching a cast, whether you're looking at a replay, compared to, oh, he got this tech at this time because he got that scout, right? That's like, it's so like blunt and obvious when I just look at, okay, which structures were built at what time. Let me just replicate that. Really, really pretty easy to do that and get to Diamond League versus when can I safely look away from my army? Oh my gosh, what a hard question.
And I think you bring up a fair good point in terms of, like, we see the pros do it, and how can we decide? How can we adjust our game whereby, all right, is it attack more important or is it expanding plan more important? Then we kind of, prioritize one over the other. I mean, the outcome will not be as good as the pros, but we still can, on average, do better on our end, right? I kind of want to build on your point regarding this, is that I actually do something to accommodate my poor mechanics by thinking about this, right? What exactly is a goal, right? So you have multi-pronged attack. Why do you do that? Because you want to split opponent's attention, so at least one of them can hit harder, right? And this you can see right now in Daggers of the Void. Zerg, Protoss, Terran, doesn't matter what race you play, you still to do it. You almost never only have one attack when you start to get 3 to 4 bases. So say if Protoss attack one side, you always have Rock Prison flying the other end, Rock Zealots, right? Circling runs by, never always one place. Same thing with Terran, you have Marine shop elsewhere. So I always want to learn to do that. So as a Terran player, I'll be like, okay, I'm going to have one medevac drop here, the second medevac drop the other side, and main army attacking forward. And then a second run by, I started to fall apart on all 3 places. And I just lose the game. And I started to learn that, okay, the reason why this time that the players send all this medevac drop is to pull some army away so that your frontal push, which is your real timing, the 2 real timing, can really do the damage. And once I get it around, I swapped my thinking about, like, how can I improve my mechanics, and should I decrease the number of multi-prong I do, whereby I just do one front attack and try to fight it out. I switch it around and be like, okay, how can I do the same thing but decrease the demand of mechanics? I replace the 3 different manifests at different places with liberators, right? They still force opponent to react, but doesn't force me to react that much. I can kill move them, right? Just switch up all on the mineral lines, abuse the race basically, right? So that's how I did it. So when before my tutor is going to be up, I kill 2 liberators when 2 medevacs. Then I just send it out there to switch up your mineral lines that is not the one I'm attacking. Then I attack and focus only looking at my main army. So that's how I kind of circumvent the mechanics issue that I have, but at the same time, kind of doing what the strategy is supposed to do, right? So I kind of break down about, rather than not importance of it, but goal focus, kind of achieve the same goal, but using tools that do not demand so much from you mechanically.
Yeah, that gosh, such a brilliant solution. I thought of liberators as you were talking, and I'm glad I was right. I think they're maybe the most perfect example of what you're talking about, where there's an inherent economy in the setup of the harassment with specifically that unit, where it is very asymmetrical, right? You kind of do your little shift click thing, say, okay, liberator, go here, siege up, target like this. And then the opponent has this massive burden. Okay, I've got to pull my probes out of the circle. I've got to get some stalkers to attack it, but it has to be enough stalkers, or they need to come at it from a certain angle. And there's all these things that they're thinking about. I have to do this at two different bases. And by the way, the front of my base is getting attacked, right? Um, I think anytime we can find adjustments like that, we should always be doing that. And I think it's not up until like the absolute like top end pro level where we should even consider doing anything different, because that economy of action is such a huge edge that because the only thing that kind of balances the other side of the scale is, oh well, the liberator thing is really predictable because it's so good. How can I abuse that, right? That's the only real counterweight, right, of why I wouldn't choose that. And unless you're at the top level of execution, like, why would I ever do anything other than the most attention efficient form of that? That's so smart.
Yeah, and I like, the coming back to like watching pro replays or watching pro um, tournaments, which is a big difference if you watch a pro replay first person view versus a tournament and the observers covering the action, is this idea of, and I think we all do it to some extent. I definitely have done it in my StarCraft playing, is like, I want to do something that looks really cool, so I'm going to emulate player X. And I just try to do whatever timing attack or build that somebody did. And it often doesn't go well because I don't have the same level of mechanics or APM or whatever. There's so many reasons why I'm not as good as that other player. But instead, taking some idea, taking some concept and doing what works for me, and this is a nice adaptation, right? So, okay, you see, TY or whomever doing multiple drops all over the place while attacking in the front. Well, maybe that's not a great idea for somebody who's not TY. So doing liberators or something like that. And I think also I've had conversations like this with folks that are GM and I'll put a cannon in my mineral line. So why are you wasting your money on getting static defense? Well, it's because I don't have the APM to come back and deal with things as easily as some other players do. And so finding what works for you in your league at your level is important. But you don't want to get stuck on that as a crutch either. You always want to be pushing the envelope of your abilities so that you are improving. So it's a nice balancing. But I think watching first person view is so very important compared to watching tournaments, because tournaments are fun, but you don't really get what's going on to learn from a player unless you're watching first person, I think.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I think
Go ahead, Max.
you bring a very good point regarding this. So there's one thing that I've been pondering about for quite some time is, you have static defense because you don't have the APM to come back to defend it, right? And for Terran, static defense is, well, you either have planetary fortress, bunker, and it's not easy like, spore caller and cannons. So I was thinking about it. And pros almost never build bunker at their different bases, right? If it's planetary, it's planetary. Rarely have bunkers because it takes supply as well. I was thinking like, well, it should work pretty well, right? That's what happened when I was like, platinum, diamond way back, And I thought, okay, to improve, I should have built bunker, and I can rationalize why, because it takes supply, it's inefficient, and so on and so forth. And I have this assumption that pros are right. I should aspire to play the dumb, and so on and so forth. And if I want to get to the next notch, I need to play the dumb, right? Because I need to, that's the next level. And very interesting, when I take a step back, even in GSL, the highest level they can play on, you can see Terran players build a bunker there. You have some, even behind the mirror line. And then Tesosis will be like, oh, no, this is a brilliant move, build a bunker there. Like, hold on a minute. It is a pro to say it's not brilliant because they can react in time. There's no point in doing that. You can squeeze a minor advantage, cutting the corners. So in a way, it's a process of saying like, I acknowledge my inability of being a multiplayer at the right time and so on, because opponent is equal skill as me, right? You have to look at 6 players at the same time, and that's when you kind of use different resources to reduce the number of places you need to pay attention to, right, to minimize the differences. So building Bangladesh, yep, I know I can ignore that more than other places, so you can focus on other places more. So I thought, well, that's great. And at the same time, it goes back to my thinking that, wow, I make an assumption that pros are correct. I should play like them, And if I cannot do it, it's because I'm not good enough. But now thinking about even pros, would be like, maybe that's merits to that. I should do that.
Yeah, very cool. I love the idea of framing StarCraft as like this resource allocation problem, right? And your attention is a resource, just like the minerals that the bunker cost are a resource, right? And at every level, you have to be evaluating, how much are those minerals worth versus my attention. And it's almost like the worse you are, the more valuable your attention is, right? Because it's such a scarce resource. And as you point out, address that's like, something you have to constantly update, right? Is this thing that was kind of a crutch that helped me in Gold League, is it time to give this up, right? But I think, Max, you very correctly point out that, you shouldn't be of the mindset of, oh, well, at a pro level, this would be bad to do, so I won't do it. I think that's just an incorrect view. And one that Twitch chat just loves to hit you with too, don't they? Um, okay, before I move on to our next point, I had one other footnote on the Wehrmacht that I thought was so interesting. So when Tetlock brings it up in the book, oh god, we're talking about like, the Nazi war machine. Like this is kind of like, this is gnarly stuff, man. Like it's like, it elicits political feelings and like just thinking about the history. And I'm so glad that he actually addresses it towards the end of that chapter. He goes, oh, hey, and by the way, I was kind of screwing with you by talking about like Nazi stuff. The whole idea is to like trigger you so that later I can point out that you need to like separate your emotions and biases from, the ideas that you're thinking about. And I thought that was really cool. I think things like that are really elegant, where he's like making a point, but the way that he made the point also kind of makes the point, right? It's sort of just a neat little thing in that book. But Max, you had a note in here about what information is available before the game, what information is available during the game. Do you want to dive into that?
Yes, I kind of talk about that earlier, using the TY was parting thing.
Mm,
So thinking about what information parting has right before the game, I'm sure parting doesn't just study TY's game, maybe like journal how Terran do, or maybe TY's practice planner, who would TY watch and so on. So like what did Bunny do with the opening and what did information did with the opening, different ways of doing it, and kind of set up information that the opponent have before the game, right? So that becomes part of the strategy planning that TY have. And here's an interesting thing. So TY kind of have a YouTube channel, and he reviews his own games. So he reviewed the game against Parting, right? And against Parting this season, he do a lot of one base build. So he's going to go for if there's an expand, he go for barracks straight to factory, and then he build engineering bay at opponent's natural to block it off. Then he just follow 1-1-1, then expand, right? So kind of one base build. And he said on the YouTube while he referring the strategy his party, he said, I think this is really strong and it's gonna catch up. It's gonna be mentioned. And I was like, is that mind game, like Stas, his next opponent is gonna watch this, right? I was like, okay, guess what? The first game against Stas, he did exactly that, and he never used it again. He kept using extreme end or the other end of what he did at one base, but he always take a very early turn. He sure can. Yep. I can't stay true to my words that this is really strong. It should be catching on. This is a mainstream thing, and then he just do 3CC, 3CC, 3CC. So you can see it's like selling the all this information at top pro level. You have like scouting your opponent in the sense to prepare your games. Like if I'm says I'll go watch TY's channel within his own game, right? It just makes sense. So before the game, there's information available, right? And TY is kind of reverse psychology there, right? So like information before the game, like okay, there's very defensive player, I should maybe cheat more, or maybe maybe I should even more economic focus, right, to out-econ him. Because it's been defensive, I can do it that way, like all these things. So you can see, right, players are preparing before the game to play against specific opponents. Conversely, for casual player like us, we play a later game. Basically, is you only have information in the game, and information that we have before the game is basically the average of what we experience. Last 10 games, last 20 games, there's a meta going on and so on. And I think that kind of we need to think about it and not just follow pros blindly, because there's so much meta game within meta game, among all these top pros, right? They try to treat each other even in their own evaluation of their own games. So I thought that's something worth pointing out about information you have in the game and before the game that affect your decision making.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so the one question I thought of while you were kind of talking about this, so do you think that when TY is saying, on his YouTube channel, oh, I think this is really good, I think it's going to catch on, do you think that he actually did believe that, or do you think that it was complete misinformation?
I would say half and half. So I don't think he's lying, but again, if you ask TY, right, what percentage of games are we going to see, using probability, that our players are going to catch on with this build, or kind of the same thing opening, right? Probably given, if it's 30%, that's pretty high, right, for something that's unorthodox. But the way he says it, right, it's like, wow, it sounds like, what, 75%? Which probably is not what he's trying to say, right? So he kind of, I'm not saying he's lying, but he did not express his true intention well, in that sense, going back to the book.
Right.
At the same time, I think there's a lot of mind games to it as well, because Parting is a player that, doesn't let it go being aggressive, right? And one way to do well is target the fact that if you expand the low ground, the SCP is vulnerable. What can you do about it? Earlier adapt, process second, gateway, max packs, and so on and so forth, right? And one day before they play against each other, well, I sound like I watch a lot of StarCraft now. One day before they play against each other, Parting against Maru in War Chess. Parting proxy a gateway right outside, Maru's natural. Then Maru just do a typical build, one barrier expand, and then when expand, a Zella comes in. I mean, Maru immediately know the timing of it, right? It has to be a proxy barriers right there. So you cancel immediately. And that's when like the build actually works. For Parting, you force a cancel. That's as good as you can hope for. And then delay it by having more units at its base. So it shows how Parting likes to play. In terms of the way he played, like being aggressive. So to play into his hand, you'll be expanding, which almost 80% of the game you can see in TVP. So what TY did is that, well, I'm not going to expand. So to prevent being vulnerable against all these things, I just don't expand, right? So in a way, it's not just, generally good against Protoss, but it's a good way to play against Parting. And it kind of exponentially showing that, wow, it's so effective, we should be doing that, it should catch on. It's slightly more about anti-Parting kind of thing. And you can see a lot of these minor things that's targeting specific players. So Time vs Maru in, I think Tin BlizzCon, why would you do 2 barracks Reaper in your own base? It's so inefficient, it's bad against almost everything except Proxy Reaper. But that's what Marvel do like half of the time, right? So that is just great. You can see all these things that, so going back to what you asked, is TY really mean that? Is it trick your opponent? I think it's half-half, right? And more importantly, it shows a greater picture of the topic we're talking about right now, is the information available to you before the game and during the game, right? You study your opponent, how you can prepare for it.
Yeah, totally makes sense. And I love that you called out that TY clearly understands this concept from earlier in our discussion, where the precision that you use with what you express matters a lot, right? I think you correctly identify, he's intentionally taking advantage of that and being imprecise in his language. Whereas if he were to be, putting something fine on it, like, oh, 30% of the time it would be correct to do this, he's helping out anyone who's trying to scout him by watching his YouTube. That's really interesting.
There's a little bit of like it's like Pavlov's dog. You can condition your opponent to do certain actions, and I think since we have a huge number of Florencio people that just came in, this is exactly what Florencio does. He conditions his opponents to react in certain ways, or Printf does this, Haas does this, and you too can do this on the ladder. Even if you do a standard build, and I was doing this for a while, about a year and a half ago, when the 2 base immortal all-ins were really popular, and I would make my build look like that, and I wouldn't do that. I would just take a greedy third or something. And it was funny because it worked a lot against Zergs that were defending something that was never coming. So you can condition your opponent to react in certain ways, and it's interesting, especially in the GSL and the tournament scene, when people are studying each other and trying to see what they like to do. And I think TY versus Parting is like such a good, it's such a good series to study, because Parting is hyper aggressive, and a lot of Terrans are dying to builds on the ladder that Parting has done. Right, it changed the meta across all the servers. And so it's interesting that TY thought about this, came up with a solution for it, and just made all of Parting's builds look like they don't work anymore.
Yeah. And people try to copy the builds and like, oh wow, this is the in thing now. I'm gonna do it. Oh wow, I want to like the meta game shifting thing is so strong and so on. And here if you dial back a little bit, is that some of the builds are more of plan against specific players, right? And I'm not saying the build itself is bad, but more about like, think about game theory again. What's the likelihood of it working in certain how well it works in probability wise? Probability is not that high, and hence it's used less, right? Because it's not so good compared to other mainstream build. They're mainstream for reasons, because they're good and versatile and so on. And people just pick it up and use it and like, wow, it works so well. Partly because opponent is surprised, right? But one thing they don't quite understand it is what you do it in a way, there are a lot of inefficiency in the build itself. It worked because it catches on surprise, and then oh, the meta can shift again. This is bad. No, it's not bad. It's always bad, technically speaking. Just that because it catches on as a pro user, and then bam, now everybody uses it. A lot of this pro build that been used are actually been developed, in my opinion, by diamond players. They understand the game enough, right? I decided that, oh, maybe I can try this, right? But they are not so efficient in the way they execute it, or some of the build orders, just very minor things. And then pros kind of like catch on to it, because master player play against diamond, and then you can see it kind of lead on, and then like, oh wow, pros like, okay, I never seen it before. You call me off guard, like, oh, I'm going to take this on board. And it happens a lot, even in recent TVT. One of the biggest innovation, I mean, pun intended, which is kind of used pretty often, is 2 factory cyclone into Mac. It's so rare in every matchup in TVT as well. And I kind of talked to different people, and someone leave a comment in my blog saying that, oh, it's a diamond player came out of it, and then I think it kind of caught on by some players, and then special did it against innovation, and then innovation uses GSL. It's like, oh wow, that's great. One friend pointed out to me is that in a very good logic, when you're at the very top, right, there's relatively low incentive to be innovative, because innovative, you take a high risk, and money's at stake, your career is at stake. You balance out what's the most likelihood of you winning. So, and even if you do innovate something good and you start reading of it, people just take that, right? So the amount of incentive to do it is kind of low. But diamond players would be like, I know enough, I can be more adventurous, and when you lose a different note because of view or your mechanics, oh, maybe I should change it a little bit here and there, right, and so on. So I thought like, pros are not just know it all. Then I mean, in terms of outcome, they're best player. Let's put it that way. But in terms of the build that they use, the decision making that they make, we shouldn't take it for granted that it has to be that. And if we do something different, we are inferior. We should aspire to be like them in this way and that manner. So I think that is a really important lesson for all the casual players.
Well, I think Max just probably quadrupled his following. All the diamond players are gonna love to hear this.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm sitting here nodding. I'm like, yeah, diamond players are really smart. You're exactly right. No, I think you make a strong case here.
I lose so many diamond. I mean, I'm the masters. I lose so many diamond players. I was like, holy crap! How did I lose that? I lose seemingly stupid things like mass reader mind with ravens. It's like, if you tell me beforehand, I'm like, what a good way to play against them. Maybe tanks and raven and Vikings. Right, I just got to run to mind. But I was playing bio, and the way I scout the things, I see Red Helen, I see some Raven. Okay, still have more tanks. Okay, you're going for Mac, and this time I'm going to play. I have this idea how we play against Mac. And then run to mind. Oh yeah, pretty good strategy. You have hidden mind here and there for scouting, for all these reasons, right? But cool, right? Just a kind of nuance to your Mac. And then the next thing I know, all right, you have actually maximized that's your army. Max Raven, that's your army. It's like, holy shit, and then it's too late for me to do anything because the game's already lost. I was like, oh, okay, cool. I'm starting to enjoy StarCraft again. It's not my mechanics. I have better mechanics than a player, but I was like, okay, like I really lose because strategy. But that's really cool.
That's awesome. All right. Well, we've been going for over 2 hours now. I definitely want to be respectful of Max's time. So I think maybe we should move on to Q&A here.
Yeah, let's do that.
So while we wait, I did eagle eye one question in the chat from earlier. Cobra Venom asks, if Aret were a sentient book, would he eat himself? But I think a better question is, if I were a sentient book, would I read myself? And the answer is probably not, because I would already know, my own content is. All right, but so moving on to a non-meme question. I actually thought of one as you were giving your last point, Max, which is, so this concept of the creative Diamond League build, right? Earlier you talked about sort of the way that your play as just a ladder grinder, right, is essentially targeted at the average baseline of everything that you see, right? My TVZs in general, most of the time look like this, and so I'm going to kind of play in a way that is consistently good against what I see most of the time. Can you, when you're trying to do this sort of creative Diamond League build, right, to get an edge, can you leverage that, right? Do you think that this is a common enough way? Like you said that that's how you approach it, and I realized, oh, okay, yeah, that's totally what I'm doing too. I think about the average experience that I have. Do you think everyone's doing that? Is that a way that we can metagame on ladder?
I think that's where I have to be more critical about the community, right?
Mm.
So think about this: you go on Reddit, you go on wherever it is, asking about help, information, how can improve and so on. And these people are those who kind of get past the, it's the balance, it's all these things. And almost everyone say, watch my replay and this, oh, you need to macro better. You need macro better. I mean, yeah, I know I need macro better, but is there any other things that can do better? No. I mean, what's the point of you having position your army here when opponents have more? I mean, to be fair, that's a fair criticism. Like, there's nothing you can do when you just keep supply blocking, you're just gonna lose. Right? Having better commission is not gonna help you, right? But at the same time, there are certain I would call it altruistic lazy criticism, whereby like, oh, you should watch White Bronze to Masters or Bronze to Grandmasters. You teach focus on macro and so on. To be fair, I did not watch his content, and based on the feedback, I believe it's great. Like helping you focus on macro, I think it's very important. But at the same time, it leads players to think about like, okay, I'm gonna focus on this. When I improve, can I build this building at this timing? If I did not, what's my mistake? I keep focusing on that. It's great, but at the same time, for many players, you kind of lost the drive of playing the game. It's not a job. You want to improve. You don't want to improve, yes, but you want to be enjoying the game of like, oh wow, I'm gonna make this play. I'm going to be more creative here. Remember the game you play? You mentioned. Remember till now because it's shit. You're adapt to the RAM. Nothing to do with mechanics. You remember forever because of the decision you make, or maybe you did some creative that you bluff your opponent, right? So you kind of get to that, but the people keep saying like, oh, stop whining, practice your macro. It can't drive certain players away, or people don't ask for feedback anymore, right? A lot of time I'd be like, this what you do, you build like, this is not good, this inefficient because, I'm talking about build differences. I'm not going to mention that, oh, should I have supply debug this timing, that, and so I mean, I don't even mention it, right? Especially when you're at a certain level, just like you couldn't do it in the game, right? No point mentioning. So for example, I say like, no, there's no point getting a reactor on your start point so early on to build double medevac, although pros do it. Because by the time you have it, you only have like 10 Marines. There's no point having 2 medevac, 10 Marines, and then you try to sting your way through. You can do a lot better by having resources elsewhere, doing this and this. And then if you want to do your 2 medevac and having early steam, I recommend this 2-1-1 build, which is a lot more efficient and so forth. So when you give feedback, like you need to kind of take into account of what the player try to do and how to improve, rather than just mechanics. At the same time, like it's just certain creative things that players try to do. Like I want to do this, I'll hit this with this unit, with that unit. And maybe at a higher level, like, hey, that doesn't make sense. Opponent's going to do this. All I need to do is very similar things, and you did, right? But well, let's take an idea, and how can improve on that? And I think many of us are quite myopic in kind of slightly off meta ideas, like TVP, tree barracks. Right, you expand entry back. Now all this are kind of mainstream and so on, but right now no one does that, right? Like 1 in 100 games, even in pro level. I think Mario did that last year against Party. The key point here is a friend told me about tree bags, and I'm like, instinctively I write it off. Like I can list 10 reasons, and I look at the reasons, they are good reasons, fair and square. But at the same time, the build itself is sound. And I should think about, for the goal it does, how can I improve on it? So we kind of work on with it together, and I was like, her build is not efficient, not built otherwise for what she want to do. So I improve on it, like build on some of the knowledge I have, and the tree bears time hit a lot earlier. Which was great, she like it. And at the same time, we kind of make some adjustments on that. How about this? Since you have tree bears, opponent knows it, they got to be defensive, right? Now, we are going to build our third CC on the low ground on the spot to abuse that, right? So you kind of play around with all these ideas to improve the strategy, and maybe like, oh wow, you only work in Diamond. Yeah, you work in Diamond, but you can play around. It's a legit, the strategy game. Is it good enough? So I think a lot of the time, players like just play like pros, macro like pros. improve your building time, make sure it's more precise on it, right? Sure, but along the way, there's a lot more room for alternative way to approach the game, to play the game. Even I play slightly differently to how Maru player. Maru play TVZ, you'd be like, there this specific timing, 2 melee and marines, clear creeps, then next push come in because of creep, so much better. I don't even have that many marines at a time, and I don't hit at the timing. I skip that part and just go for a push, So that's how I have to change up and play.
Yeah, that gosh, it makes so much sense. It makes me think you'd probably be a really great coach in StarCraft because you have that thing in your head. Like I've never heard anybody say that before. That you can think about the player's limitations for where they're at and make an adjustment. Say, okay, what are you trying to do? Now let's make tweaks to improve towards that, not just hit you over the head with, hey, don't supply block, you dummy. Which is a lot of time what we do say to each other. We do have one question in Q&A here from our very own Lord Cranial. He says, in thinking about thinking, you talk about the likelihood of proxy reapers, and once the 215 moment passes, the chances of proxies becomes higher. However, players in lower leagues typically do not hit timings as crisply and tend to be behind in a timing attack. Can this potentially hurt lower league players' ability to update their probabilities in their games?
Right. I think that's a great question. So I'm going to start off with a bit of my own experience, and then the pro, and then just the question specifically. So my own experience is that I scout my opponent in early game and stuff, and I see a Stargate, and I was like, okay, the Oracle's hit at this timing, I'm going to defend this, and I just go there and like, okay, I'm going to give it 10 more seconds, right? Maybe you're puffing, maybe like you say you're not pro, right? Things is going to be a bit off. 10 seconds. Okay, and that deduce is not going to hit there at the timing, and I move away. And guess what? I watch a replay. I got wrecked by the Oracle because I move it away. The reason is the guy did not do it ultimately. He put the Oracle to the corner of the map. I forgot to rally back to my base. So I just stuck there for 20 seconds. And then when I come to my base, like, well, happy birthday to your Oracle. Good gift. So that's when I like, and I was like, at the point of time, I was like, when I have my friends telling me like, damn it, I lose to those inferior player that play so shit, and I lose to them. I was like, yeah, I can start to get the feeling now. But I know like, there's not a lot kind of thing. So how to adjust to all these things, right? I would say is try to be slightly on the safe end for generally mid-tier level player and so on, even myself. Like when I'm not sure something, I just gonna be slightly more defensive, especially for my playstyle, right? If you see that, going back to the example that the question asked, you see that there's proxy barracks but a reporting coming, just hold on for a while. The fact that, right, okay, no Reaper, I'm going to send my Helens that used to defend the Reaper to opponent's base to kill his workers, right? That's the most efficient way to do it. Okay, I'm going to hold on. If I don't do that, I'm going to kill fewer SCVs. Okay, compared to, say, if I move out right now, you have your Reapers coming to my base and I lose like 10 SCVs, right? That's not going to work, right? And one way to think about it is that not just because opponents is inefficient, right? You should only think like this because you're a lower league, but it should apply to every top tier players because it's something that top tier player can do as well, right? Whereby I don't send the Reapers at this timing, so that you're off. Then you think I don't do it, then I do it, right? And I've seen it in top level play by MC, way back how the storm and Oracle's kind of new. Everybody's like, the whole Terran community, like, what timing the Oracle's gonna hit. I think someone even talked to me like, at this map, it should be hit at this range. At this map, at this range, and the fraction of difference is 2 seconds. Right? It's crazy how occupied people are with all these things. And guess what MC did? He showed he did a Stargate, he have Oracle, corner boost, you see it, he showed it to you, but he did not send an Oracle, right? But that's inefficient, right? because by the time he sent Oracle, you had more Marines and more things prepared because you still prepare against it. After all, what it did is he wait for the second Oracle, sometimes even the third one, then he go in. So delay timing, but a stronger punch, right? To kind of adjust to the player's assumption of I expect X on this timing, right? And this is a top level, money at stake, everything's play. So rather than saying that adjust to your level, we should be adjusting it. What are the plausible moves? Rather than, oh, it's shit, so I just shit players. No, not like that. But thinking on a more, giving credit to opponent, it may be a trick. And I was victim of that intuition as well. Same thing. Proxy, Bears Reaper. And I defended like I killed 3 to 4 Reaper at the start. I was like, there's no way you can jump in more Reapers. And I sent everything across the map, aim, I'm gonna win. And I was like, how can you have 5 more Reapers coming on my base? And I lost the game that I should have won. When you defend Proxy Reapers like 4 Proxy Reaper at the start, you won the game, And I was like punching my desk and I was like, man, so yeah, there's some nuance to separate yourself, like the level you play on, and literally in the game itself, opponent can do other moves to make use of that seemingly inefficient move, but do greater damage.
Makes a lot of sense. Really great answer. Well, I don't see more questions coming here, so I think it's probably a wrap unless anybody has closing thoughts here.
Yeah, I'll just add to anybody trying to improve. The whole purpose of this the Archives Book Club is to learn how to get better at StarCraft through study. And if you're learning in terms of improving your predictions and improving your scouting and game knowledge, just take it step by step. I think Max has really laid it out in more ways than one about play to your level and don't try and look at the pros and say, well, I got to play like the pros. Just incrementally build up these things, build up these skills. And the takeaway is that your predictions will improve over time as you do that. If you follow, like we've talked about, quantifying your predictions and taking a step back from the game and seeing, afterwards doing analysis.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Great. Well, just want to thank everybody again for giving us a shot today. Everybody who came in from the raid. Thank you to Florencio for the support. Thank you, Lord Cranial, for moderating and helping us out. I suppose probably you'll be seeing some social media links in chat here if you want to find Adraseth or you want to find Max, or you are interested in more episodes of the archives. Those are available as well. Of course, huge thank you to Max for coming on here. This was kind of a crazy idea that I suggested to him because he asked me for my opinion about something small on Twitter, and I thought, man, I really love your stuff. You would be so great on the book club. Would you be willing to do this? And, I feel like I did almost nothing to prepare for this episode because Max wrote such a good article, and then Adraseth had show notes that had a bunch of, great bullet points. So thank you, Adraseth. Thank you, Max, for joining us. This was a great time. I really enjoyed, talking about these concepts with you.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me. So kind of interesting when you talk about it's a good article and so on. I would say when I post an article, it often the people have especially on Reddit, or I got to point this out for whatever your GM, here it goes. People always criticize it, and I'm open to it, no problem, right? But there will always be those who don't understand it when they criticize it. It's just understanding. And then there are those who kind of just didn't read it. But for this one, I'm very surprised that no one ever has such comment on it. Everyone just, oh, great article, great article. I was like, okay, something is strange. So I think it's a good lesson for me because way back, many different articles, I try to be more thorough with my thoughts. Bad examples, and there's a lot of sub points here and there. And in my mind, it's very clear. All right. But probably in the reader's mind, it's not that clear. Right. And some of the comment that people have is I lost their attention, so they don't read. Or maybe I did not present it good enough that they didn't understand it. To, in my perspective, you don't even understand it and you're criticizing it because the way you criticize shows that you don't understand it, But on the flip side, it shows that no, I'm not being concise enough. I did not communicate efficient enough. So people kind of, don't understand it and didn't read it. But for this one, in my mind, I was keep telling myself, okay, there's a lot of ideas here, very broad, generating 2 books. How can I be as concise as possible and every word count, nothing extra, not too many examples, So I was very, very conscious about it, planning about this, drafting it. And I kind of like the fact that, it shows that no one really say like, the comments show that they did not read it or they did not understand it. So I thought like, wow, maybe I should really draft more for my other articles than that I did in the past. So that's a great lesson for me.
Yeah, and I think actually an equally great lesson for me. In the past, I have put way too much stuff in the show notes, and it's made it difficult to do the book club. And I think I kind of learned from you in that sense that we get enough out of these books if we read them, pick out a couple of important concepts, are generally inspired by the subject matter, and then talk about StarCraft for a couple hours. Like that I think makes for a really good discussion. Yeah. So I guess that's a wrap. But thank you again. Really appreciate you coming on, Max, and maybe who knows, we'll do another collaboration down the road.
Oh, look forward to it.